In the grand theater of American politics, the transfer of power is a sacred ritual, meticulously choreographed and enshrined in law. But what happens when that power doesn't transfer, but simply vanishes? What happens when the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, is struck down, leaving a vacuum at the very heart of the nation? History tells us that a secret government once rose to fill that void. It was a government of one, operating from the shadows of the White House, making decisions of war and peace, and shaping the destiny of the country. This secret ruler, however, was not a scheming general or an ambitious vice president. It was a person no one had elected, someone whose authority was granted not by the Constitution, but by love and loyalty. This is the story of Edith Wilson, the First Lady who, in a moment of unprecedented crisis, stepped into the shoes of her incapacitated husband and effectively became the first woman to run the United States. It is a tale of fierce devotion, of a breathtaking political deception, and of a constitutional crisis so profound that its repercussions would change the very rules of American power forever. Was she a hero who saved her husband, or a usurper who betrayed her country? The answer is one of the most complex and fascinating in presidential history. Edith Wilson. The formative years of an extraordinary woman. To fully comprehend the remarkable individual Edith Wilson would evolve into, an examination of the environment that molded her character and worldview is essential. Edith Bowling entered the world in 1872 in Wytheville, Virginia, emerging as a child of the American South, a region still grappling with the profound repercussions of the Civil War. The conflict, concluding just 7 years prior to her birth, had devastated the Southern economy, dismantled the plantation system, and left communities in a state of reconstruction that blended resentment, poverty, and a clinging adherence to pre-war social hierarchies. Wytheville, a small town in southwestern Virginia nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, exemplified this post-war reality. It was a place where Confederate sympathies lingered, and the scars of defeat were visible in the ruined infrastructure, impoverished families, and a collective memory haunted by loss. Edith's birth into this setting positioned her within a narrative of resilience amid decline, where the echoes of a lost cause influenced daily life, education, and familial values. Her family background further anchored her in this Southern heritage, blending aristocratic pride with the harshness of reduced circumstances. The Bowlings traced their lineage to prominent Virginia colonists, claiming direct descent from Pocahontas, the Native American figure whose marriage to John Rolfe symbolized early colonial alliances. This connection was not merely genealogical trivia, but a source of familial identity, reinforcing a sense of historical significance, even as economic fortunes waned. Edith's father, William Holcomb Bowling, a judge and lawyer, had served in the Confederate Army, embodying the South's defeated yet unbowed spirit. Her mother, Sally White Bowling, came from similar stock, and together they raised 11 children in a household that maintained genteel traditions despite financial constraints. The Bowling home was spacious, a remnant of better times, but resources were stretched thin, with the family relying on thrift, home production, and community networks to sustain their lifestyle. This environment of genteel poverty, as it was often termed, profoundly shaped Edith's upbringing. The large family size meant shared responsibilities, limited personal luxuries, and a constant awareness of scarcity. Meals were simple, clothing mended rather than replaced, and entertainment derived from family gatherings, storytelling, and local events rather than extravagant outings. Yet, the Bowlings upheld standards of decorum education, and social grace, instilling in their children a belief that refinement transcended material wealth. For Edith, the seventh child, this duality fostered a resilience born of necessity, teaching her to navigate limitations with dignity and resourcefulness. It also embedded a deep appreciation for family bonds, where loyalty and mutual support were paramount in the face of external hardships. The post-Civil War South social structure further influenced her development. Racial hierarchies remained entrenched, with former slaves and their descendants facing systemic oppression through sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, and violence. As part of a white aristocratic family, the Bowlings operated within this framework, their diminished status still affording privileges denied to African Americans. Edith's childhood exposure to these dynamics, though not explicitly documented in her later reflections, likely contributed to her understanding of power, hierarchy, and endurance, themes that would resurface in her role as First Lady. The era's emphasis on Southern womanhood, emphasizing domesticity, moral strength, and familial devotion, also molded her, preparing her for a life where personal fortitude would be essential. Her education reflected the sporadic and informal nature typical of many Southern girls in the Reconstruction era. Unlike the structured academic paths available to boys or wealthier urban children, Edith's learning was primarily home-based, supplemented by brief periods at local institutions. This approach stemmed from financial constraints, cultural norms prioritizing domestic skills for girls, and the disrupted educational systems in the post-war South. Schools in Widowhood were limited, often one-room affairs serving diverse ages, with curricula focused on basic literacy, arithmetic, and moral instruction. Edith attended Powell's School for Girls in Richmond for 2 terms, a boarding establishment that provided a more refined setting, emphasizing etiquette, literature, and light academics. However, her time there was short, curtailed by family finances and the need to return home. The bulk of her instruction came from her grandmother, Ann White, a figure of significant influence in the Bowling household. Confined to her bed due to a debilitating fall that left her crippled, Ann White transformed her immobility into a teaching platform. From this bedside academy, she imparted lessons in reading, writing, history, and literature, drawing on the family's library of classics like Shakespeare, Dickens, and the Bible. This intimate, personalized education fostered in Edith a love for books and storytelling skills that would later serve her in social and political circles. Beyond academics, her grandmother taught practical household management, sewing, cooking, and budgeting, essential for a woman expected to run a home efficiently amid scarcity. This upbringing also emphasized the Southern code of family loyalty and stoic endurance. In a large household where resources were shared, Edith learned to prioritize collective needs over individual desires, developing a sense of duty that bordered on self-sacrifice. The Bowlings, despite their poverty, maintained social connections with other Virginia families of similar heritage, attending church services, community events, and occasional gatherings that reinforced class identity. For Edith, these experiences instilled a powerful resilience, forged by the necessity to adapt to limitations while upholding dignity. It was a world where women served as the steadfast pillars of the home, managing domestic affairs with quiet strength, largely excluded from public or political realms. No one, including Edith, could foresee the extraordinary role she would assume on the national stage, where these qualities of loyalty and endurance would prove invaluable. Life, however, diverged from the expected path of quiet domesticity. Edith possessed a striking presence, with captivating violet eyes, dark hair, and a vibrant personality that drew attention. Her intelligence and charm made her a standout in social settings, despite the family's modest means. At the age of 24, in 1896, she married Norman Galt, a prosperous jeweler from Washington, D.C. This union represented a significant elevation from her Virginia upbringing, transitioning her from genteel poverty to urban comfort. Galt, owner of a successful jewelry store established in 1802, provided financial stability and entry into the capital's social scene. The marriage, lasting 12 years until Galt's death in 1908, was described as content and harmonious. They resided in a comfortable home in Washington, where Edith managed household affairs, entertained guests, and participated in the city's cultural life. Without children, she focused on social engagements, becoming a respected figure in Washington's middle-upper-class circles. This period honed her skills in hostessing, conversation, and navigation of social hierarchies, abilities that would later define her tenure as First Lady. Galt's business success afforded travels, fine clothing, and involvement in charitable activities, broadening her horizons beyond Witherville's confines. Edith's time as Mrs. Galt also introduced her to independence. Following her husband's death from heart disease at age 43, she inherited the jewelry business, which she managed with acumen for several years before handing operations to a trusted employee. This experience in business administration, unusual for women of her era, built her confidence and financial savvy. Her striking appearance and engaging personality made her a sought-after companion, though she remained discreet in personal matters. This phase of life, from 1896 to 1915, transformed Edith from a provincial Southern girl into a poised, self-assured woman ready for unforeseen opportunities. Her marriage to Galt lifted her socially and economically, providing the platform from which she would enter the political sphere. The skills acquired, resilience from poverty, duty from family life, grace from social navigation, prepared her for the challenges ahead, where she would become not just a wife but a partner in power. Edith Wilson, From Widowhood to a Fateful Meeting. Tragedy struck in 1908 when Norman Galt died suddenly, leaving Edith a widow at the age of 36. Norman, a successful jeweler in Washington, D.C., passed away from kidney disease after a brief illness, an event that shattered the comfortable life they had built together over 12 years. Galt's death was unexpected, as he had been in apparent good health until the onset of symptoms, which progressed rapidly despite medical intervention. Edith, who had no children from the marriage, found herself alone in their home, facing the immediate challenges of grief, financial uncertainty, and the societal expectations placed on widows in early 20th century America. In an era when women were often dependent on male relatives for support, Edith's situation could have led to a diminished social standing or reliance on her family back in Virginia. The loss was profound, as Galt had provided not only economic stability but also companionship in Washington's vibrant social scene, where Edith had flourished as a hostess and community participant. This moment represented a potential turning point where Edith's narrative might have faded into relative obscurity, conforming to the conventional path for many widows of her class: remarriage to a suitable gentleman or a quiet life of charitable pursuits and family visits. Widows in the Progressive era faced limited options, suffrage was still a decade away, and professional opportunities for women, especially those from genteel backgrounds, were scarce. Many returned to their parental homes or lived with siblings, managing households or engaging in volunteer work. Edith, however, was not inclined to be circumscribed by bereavement. Her upbringing in post-Civil War Virginia, marked by genteel poverty and a strong sense of duty, had instilled in her a resilience and independence that now came to the forefront. Rather than succumbing to societal norms that might have seen her retreat from public life, she embraced the challenges ahead with determination and acumen. Edith inherited Norman Galt's successful jewelry business, Galt and Brothers, a firm established in 1802 and renowned for serving Washington's elite, including presidents and diplomats. The store, located on Pennsylvania Avenue, dealt in fine gems, silver, and custom pieces, generating substantial revenue through its reputation for quality and discretion. In 1908, inheriting a business was unusual for a woman. Common practice dictated selling the enterprise or delegating management to a male relative or trusted employee. Legal barriers, such as limited property rights for married women, though Edith was now widowed, and social prejudices against women in commerce, made her decision bold. Yet Edith chose to take direct control, a move that demonstrated her shrewdness and willingness to defy conventions. She proved to be an astute and capable businesswoman, immersing herself in the operations with a hands-on approach. Edith managed the finances, reviewing ledgers, negotiating with suppliers from Europe and New York, and overseeing inventory to ensure the store maintained its high standards. She supervised a staff of clerks, jewelers, and engravers, implementing efficient systems for customer service and record keeping. Under her leadership, the business not only sustained, but continued to build its reputation, attracting clientele through personalized service and exclusive designs. Edith's Southern charm and social connections aided in this, as she hosted events and leveraged her network to promote the store. Her success in this male-dominated field was remarkable, providing financial independence that allowed her to travel, purchase luxuries, and maintain her social standing without reliance on others. One visible symbol of her modern independent spirit was her acquisition of an electric coupe, making her one of the first women in Washington to drive her own car. Automobiles in 1908 were novelties, expensive and mechanically complex, with electric models favored by women for their cleanliness and ease of operation compared to gasoline vehicles. Edith's coupe, likely a Baker or Detroit electric model, featured a top speed of 20 to 25 miles per hour and a range of 50 to 80 miles per charge, suitable for city errands and social visits. She navigated Washington streets with confidence, zipping to appointments, shops, and luncheons, her presence behind the wheel drawing admiration and curiosity. This act of mobility represented more than convenience. It signified autonomy in an age when women's movement was often restricted by chaperones or public transport. Driving allowed Edith to control her schedule, explore the city, and project an image of progressiveness, aligning with the era's emerging new woman ideal, educated, active, and self-reliant. For 7 years, from 1908 to 1915, Edith lived as a self-sufficient, successful, and respected widow, relishing her financial independence and freedom. This period was one of personal growth and exploration. Without the responsibilities of marriage or children, she traveled extensively, visiting Europe where she indulged in fashion, art, and culture, experiences that refined her taste and broadened her perspectives. In Washington, she became a fixture in social circles, attending teas, dinners, and charitable events hosted by prominent families. Her home on Connecticut Avenue served as a gathering place for friends, where she hosted intimate luncheons and card parties, honing her skills as a gracious hostess. Edith's wardrobe, featuring the latest styles from Paris designers like Worth and Poiret, reflected her evolving sophistication, with tailored suits and elegant gowns that accentuated her figure and projected confidence. Financially, her management of Galt and Bro provided security and empowerment. She made strategic decisions, such as expanding the store's offerings to include imported watches and silverware, which increased revenue. Edith also invested in stocks and real estate, demonstrating a keen business sense that ensured her comfort. This independence was rare. Most widows of her class remarried quickly or lived modestly on inheritances. Edith's choice to remain single for 7 years allowed her to define her identity beyond wife or daughter, cultivating interests in literature, theater, and current events. She attended lectures at the Smithsonian and joined women's clubs, engaging with the suffrage movement peripherally, though her conservative Southern background tempered her activism. Edith's strength of will during this time was evident in her response to societal pressures. Friends and family encouraged remarriage, viewing prolonged widowhood as unconventional, but she resisted, prioritizing her autonomy. This shrewdness, balancing tradition with modernity, would later prove essential in the high-stakes environment of the White House. Her widowhood forged a self-assured woman, ready for unexpected opportunities, demonstrating that loss could be a catalyst for reinvention rather than retreat. In March of 1915, that independent life was irrevocably interrupted. The President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, was a man consumed by grief. His first wife, Ellen Axon Wilson, had died in August 1914 from Bright's disease, a kidney ailment, after 29 years of marriage. The loss left Wilson devastated, plunging him into profound depression that affected his work and health. As war clouds gathered over Europe, with the sinking of the Lusitania in May 1915, escalating tensions, Wilson's isolation compounded the pressures of his office. He confided in close aides about his loneliness, describing himself as starved for companionship. Wilson's cousin, Helen Woodrow Bones, who resided in the White House as a companion after Ellen's death, grew concerned for his well-being. Helen, a kind and observant woman, sought to alleviate his sorrow by introducing him to vibrant company. She had befriended Edith Galt through mutual acquaintances in Washington's social scene, where Edith's charm and independence stood out. Recognizing Edith's wit and vitality as potential remedies for Wilson's melancholy, Helen arranged a casual meeting at the White House. On March 23, 1915, during a tea hosted by Helen, Edith encountered the president, an introduction that would alter the course of her life and American history. The connection between Edith and Wilson was immediate and intense. Wilson, at 58, was drawn to Edith's confidence, beauty, and engaging conversation. Her violet eyes, dark hair, and Southern accent captivated him, offering a stark contrast to the somber White House atmosphere still in mourning. For Edith, the attention from the nation's leader, a brilliant scholar, former Princeton president, and progressive reformer, was exhilarating. Wilson's charisma, intellectual depth, and vulnerability in grief created a bond that deepened rapidly. Their courtship unfolded swiftly, beginning with long drives in the Virginia countryside, where they discussed literature, politics, and personal aspirations. Wilson, a prolific writer, exchanged passionate letters with Edith, expressing admiration for her strength and companionship. Edith, in turn, provided emotional support, listening to his concerns about European conflicts and domestic reforms like the Federal Reserve Act. This whirlwind romance, lasting just 2 months before Wilson's proposal in May 1915, scandalized Washington. Rumors circulated of an affair predating Ellen's death, fueled by the rapid pace and Wilson's public displays of affection. Political advisors warned that a quick remarriage could damage his image, portraying him as insensitive amid national mourning for Ellen. The 1916 election loomed, with Republicans poised to exploit any perceived weakness. Yet Wilson, known for stubborn idealism, remained resolute. He viewed Edith as divine intervention, a partner to rescue him from despair. Their December 18, 1915, wedding was private, held at Edith's home with 40 guests, blending simplicity with elegance. Edith Bowling Galt, the Virginia jeweler's widow, became Edith Wilson, First Lady. Her initial years as First Lady were a whirlwind of public duties. She was a glamorous and active hostess, but her most significant role came with America's entry into World War I in 1917. She threw herself into the war effort with patriotic fervor, becoming a powerful symbol of home front sacrifice. She promoted gasless Sundays and meatless Mondays to conserve resources. Most famously, she brought a flock of sheep to graze on the White House lawn, both to save on manpower for mowing and to raise money for the Red Cross by auctioning off their wool. She was a visible, popular, and supportive partner to the president, but her role was still largely ceremonial. She was the nation's hostess, not a political advisor. That was about to change in the most dramatic way imaginable. The war ended in 1918, and Woodrow Wilson had a dream. It was a dream of a new world order, one based on diplomacy and collective security, where a global body called the League of Nations would prevent such a catastrophic war from ever happening again. The Treaty of Versailles, which formally ended the war, included the charter for his beloved League. For Wilson, this was more than a political goal. It was a moral crusade. He had poured his heart and soul into its creation during the peace negotiations in Paris. But when he returned to the United States, he faced a formidable obstacle: a hostile Republican-controlled Senate, led by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, his political nemesis. Many senators feared that the League would entangle the U.S. in foreign conflicts and undermine American sovereignty. They refused to ratify the treaty without significant amendments that Wilson, in his righteous conviction, refused to accept. Determined to win the support of the American people and force the Senate's hand, Wilson embarked on a grueling cross-country speaking tour in September of 1919. It was a punishing schedule. He traveled by train, giving multiple speeches a day, his voice growing hoarse, his body growing weaker. He suffered from blinding headaches and was visibly exhausted. His personal physician, Dr. Cary Grayson, begged him to stop, warning that he was on the verge of a complete breakdown. But Wilson, driven by his messianic zeal, pressed on. The breaking point came in Pueblo, Colorado, on September 25th. After delivering a passionate and emotional speech, he collapsed. The rest of the tour was canceled, and the presidential train sped back to Washington. A few days later, on the morning of October 2nd, 1919, Edith awoke to find her husband on the floor of his bathroom, unconscious. Woodrow Wilson had suffered a massive stroke. The severity of the stroke was catastrophic. It paralyzed the entire left side of his body. He was bedridden, barely able to speak above a whisper, and his vision was impaired. Perhaps most devastatingly, the stroke profoundly affected his mental state. He became prone to wild emotional swings and episodes of uncontrollable weeping. His judgment was clouded, and his already stubborn personality hardened into a rigid, almost paranoid refusal to compromise. The brilliant, articulate professor who had led the nation through a world war was, for all intents and purposes, gone. The President of the United States was incapacitated. In that moment, Edith Wilson faced an impossible choice. The Constitution at the time was vague on the issue of presidential disability. The accepted protocol would have been for the Vice President, Thomas Marshall, to take over, but this would have required either Wilson's resignation or a formal declaration by Congress that he was unable to perform his duties. For Edith, this was unthinkable. She believed, and Dr. Grayson agreed, that the shock of losing the presidency would kill her husband. She also knew that if his political enemies like Senator Lodge knew the full extent of his condition, they would tear him apart and destroy his legacy. Driven by a fierce protective love, she made a decision that would alter the course of history. She would conceal the truth. She would protect her husband at all costs. She, along with Dr. Grayson and a few loyal aides, created a wall of secrecy around the president. They released vague, misleading statements to the press, claiming he was merely suffering from nervous exhaustion. And Edith appointed herself as the sole gatekeeper to the leader of the free world. Thus began one of the most extraordinary periods in American political history, Edith Wilson's secret presidency. For the next 17 months until the end of Wilson's term in March of 1921, nothing could get to the president without first going through his wife. Every document, every piece of correspondence, every request from cabinet members was delivered to her. She then reviewed this mountain of information and, in her own words, decided what was important and what was not. The trivial matters, she claimed, were handled by the various government departments. The important ones she would present to her husband in a digested, summarized form during the brief periods when he was lucid. In her memoir, she defended her actions, insisting that she never once made a single decision on matters of public policy. She called her role a stewardship, arguing she was merely a facilitator, a loyal servant protecting her husband from the burdens of office. But this defense, however sincere, crumbles under scrutiny. By controlling the entire flow of information to the president, she held the ultimate power. She alone determined which issues he would even be aware of, which cabinet members' advice he would hear, and which legislative matters would be brought to his attention. An issue deemed unimportant by Edith Wilson simply ceased to exist for the executive branch. She was, in effect, the acting chief of staff, secretary of state, and president, all rolled into one. Washington, D.C., a city that runs on information and access, was rife with suspicion. Cabinet members grew frustrated, unable to get guidance or decisions from the president. Foreign ambassadors were turned away. The government seemed rudderless. Rumors of a petticoat government began to circulate, a sexist term that nonetheless captured the essence of the situation. Secretary of State Robert Lansing, deeply concerned about the power vacuum, began convening cabinet meetings on his own authority to keep the government functioning. When Edith found out, she was furious. Viewing it as an act of disloyalty and usurpation, she convinced Wilson to demand Lansing's resignation. The message was clear. No one was to circumvent her authority. The most dramatic confrontation came when a congressional delegation, led by Republican Senator Albert Fall, demanded to see the president to assess his fitness for office. Edith knew this was a critical moment. She carefully stage-managed the entire encounter. She propped Wilson up in his bed, arranged the lighting to hide the paralyzed side of his face, and coached him on what to say. When the senators entered the sick room, they saw a pale but seemingly alert president who engaged in a few minutes of coherent conversation. The ruse worked. Senator Fall left the meeting convinced that while Wilson was a sick man, he was still mentally competent. Edith had outmaneuvered them, preserving her husband's position and her own secret control. The consequences of Edith's stewardship were profound and in many ways tragic. The most significant casualty was the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. As the ratification debate raged in the Senate, there were opportunities for compromise. Many moderate Republicans were willing to support the treaty with certain reservations, but all attempts to negotiate were filtered through Edith, Deeply protective of her husband's original vision and sharing his contempt for his political opponents, she blocked access to those who urged compromise. Historians have long debated whether a healthy, engaged Woodrow Wilson might have found a way to strike a deal and get his beloved league approved. But the isolated, enfeebled president, his information carefully curated by his wife, refused to budge. The treaty was defeated in the Senate. Wilson's greatest dream, the very cause for which he had sacrificed his health, died on the floor of Congress, partly because the one person who could have saved it was locked away in a sick room, shielded from reality by his loving wife. Edith Wilson's secret presidency exposed a dangerous flaw in the U.S. Constitution. What happens when a president is alive but unable to govern? Her actions, born of love and loyalty, created a constitutional crisis that left the nation without clear leadership for over a year. This glaring loophole remained a source of concern for decades. It was the memory of the Wilson situation that directly led to the drafting and eventual ratification of the 25th Amendment in 1967. This amendment created a clear legal process for dealing with presidential disability, allowing for the vice president to temporarily take power. In a very real sense, the most lasting legacy of Edith's stewardship is the constitutional safeguard that ensures such a secret, unelected presidency can never happen again. After Woodrow Wilson left office in 1921, he and Edith retired to a private home in Washington. She devotedly cared for him until his death 3 years later. For the nearly 4 decades that she survived him, Edith transformed herself into the fierce guardian of his legacy. She meticulously organized his presidential papers, wrote her memoir defending their actions, and dedicated her life to preserving his image as a great and visionary leader. She remained a formidable public figure, attending the inauguration of John F. Kennedy in 1961, a living link to a dramatic and controversial past. So how should history judge Edith Wilson? Was she a villain who usurped power for personal reasons? Or was she a hero, a devoted wife who did what she had to do to protect the man she loved from ruin and death? The truth, as it so often is not that simple. She was, without question, a remarkable woman of immense strength, intelligence, and will. She was faced with a situation for which there was no precedent and no rule book. In that impossible moment, she chose her husband over the country. Her actions were not born of a lust for power, but of a profound and fierce love. Yet, in protecting the man, she arguably failed the office. Her stewardship created a dangerous power vacuum and may have inadvertently led to the failure of his most cherished political goal. She was a woman of her time, acting according to a deeply ingrained code of wifely duty, who found herself at the center of a thoroughly modern crisis of governance. Her story is a powerful, poignant, and cautionary tale. It is a lesson in the immense complexities of power, the profound conflict between private love and public duty, and the astonishing ability of a single individual, standing in the breach of history, to change a nation,